Chapter 1. The smell of cheap soap and cheaper champagne. Stay away from the guests, EARL. You're too poor to be mingling. The words hit me before the smell of the overpriced roses did. I was standing just inside the double doors of the Grand Regency Ballroom, still holding the C.A. Ridboe Road box of ceremony programs I'd printed on my own dime at the copy shop on 5th. My suit, navy blue, off the rack from JCPenney's Clea Rance rack, still had the creases from the plastic wrapping. My shoes, polished but scuffed at the heels, squeaked on the marbly floor. Jessica, my daughter-in-law, didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She stood 3 feet away, her ivory wedding gown costing more than my truck, her veil pinned with diamond-studded combs that caught the chandelier light like broken glass. Her mother, Barbara, was beside her, adjusting the train with manicured fingers, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "I'm not mingling," I said. My voice sounded rougher than I intended. "I'm just dropping these off." "Exactly," Jessica said.
She didn't look at me.
She looked past me, at the arriving guests, men in tuxedos that cost more than my monthly Social Security check, women in dresses that probably had their own security detail. "The photographer is already here. I don't want any confusion about who's who." Barbara snorted. "He looks like he wandered in from the parking garage." I tightened my grip on the box. The C.A. Ridboe Road edges dug into my palms. I'd been up since 4 a.m., printing those programs. I'd borrowed my neighbor's printer, because mine had jammed. I'd spent $200 RS on paper and ink, money I didn't have because Jessica had called me 3 days ago, practically in TRS, saying the printer had screwed up the order, and could I please help because it was her big day and she couldn't have anything ruined. So I'd helped. Like I'd helped when David, my son, had needed a co-signer for his first CAR loan. Like I'd helped when Jessica's catering business had gone under and they'd needed first and last month's rent. Like I'd helped every time they'd called, every time they'd needed something I could give. And this was the thanks. A dismissal. A public humiliation disguised as concern for Ape Rancis. "I'll just leave them here," I said. I set the box on a NEARBY table, the one draped with a linen cloth that probably cost more than my entire outfit. I smoothed the C.A. Ridboe Road down, aligning it with the edge of the tablecloth. A pointless gesture, but it gave me something to do with my hands. "EARL," Jessica said, her tone softening just enough to be patronizing. "It's not about you. It's about the image. This wedding is being featured in Metropolitan Bride. We can't have variables." "Variables," I repeated. The word tasted like ash. "Yes," Barbara chimed in. "People might think you're RT of the waitstaff. Or worse, a guest who couldn't afford a proper invitation." I looked at my son. David was across the room, talking to a group of men in tuxedos. He was laughing, his hand resting on the shoulder of a man with a Rolex that could buy my house. He saw me looking. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. Then he looked away, back to the men in tuxedos, back to the world he'd chosen over mine. I felt a cold knot tighten in my chest. Not anger, not yet, just a hollow, aching emptiness. The kind that comes from realizing you've been a convenience, not a father. "I understand," I said. I didn't. Not really. But I said it because it was easier than arguing. Easier than causing a scene. Easier than admitting that my own son was ashamed of me. I turned to leave. My shoes squeaked again. Louder this time. A few heads turned. I saw the flicker of amusement in their eyes. The pity. The disdain. That I kept walking. Past the ice sculptures shaped like swans. Past the chocolate fountain that smelled like burnt sugar, past the band tuning up, their instruments gleaming under the lights. I pushed open the service entrance door and stepped out into the loading dock. The air was sealer here, smelling of diesel and wet C.A. Ridboe Road. I leaned against the brick wall, my legs suddenly unsteady. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a crumpled pack of cigarettes. I lit one with a cheap lighter, the flame trembling in the wind. I smoked it down to the filter, the smoke filling my lungs, tasting like tar and regret. I thought about the money I'd spent on the programs. The money I'd spent on David's education. The money I'd spent on keeping them afloat when they'd crashed. I thought about the retirement I didn't have, the savings I'd depleted, the future I'd sacrificed. I thought about my wife, S.A. Ra. She died 5 years ago. Cancer. We'd spent everything trying to save her. The treatments, the medications, the experimental trials. It hadn't been enough. She'd slipped away in a hospital bed, her hand in mine, her last words a whisper about taking care of David. I'd promised her. I'd kept that promise. Even when it meant eating canned soup for dinner. Even when it meant skipping my own medications. Even when it meant watching my son marry a woman who looked at me like I was dirt. I finished the cigarette and stubbed it out on the brick wall. I looked back at the ballroom doors. I could hear the music rooting, the strings swelling, the guests applauding. The ceremony was about to begin. That I should have gone back in. I should have taken my seat in the last row, the one reserved for family. I should have smiled and pretended everything was fine, but I didn't. I walked to my truck. The old Ford F-150 with the primer spots and the cracked leather seat. I got in, rooted the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot. I didn't look back at the Grand Regency. I didn't look back at the wedding. I didn't look back at the life I'd built and lost. I drove to the cemetery.
To Sarah's grave.
I sat on the damp grass, the headstone COL against my back. I told her what had happened. I told her about the programs, the dismissal, the look on David's face. I told her I was sorry. Sorry for failing her. Sorry for failing David. Sorry for being too poor to be a father worth acknowledging. That the sun was setting by the time I finished. The sky was a bruised purple, the air growing colder. I stood up, brushing the grass off my trousers. I looked at the headstone. S.A. Ra Elizabeth Miller, beloved wife, devoted mother. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the last thing I had left of hers, a small silver locket. Inside was a picture of her and David, taken the day he'd graduated high school. They were both smiling, happy. Before the money ran out. Before the cancer. Before Jessica. I opened the locket. I ran my thumb over the picture. Then I closed it and tucked it back into my pocket. I walked back to my truck. I drove home. To my small, empty house on the edge of town. I made myself a sandwich. White bread, processed cheese, a slice of bologna. I ate it standing at the kitchen counter. Ring out the window at the Keening Street. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't check my phone. I didn't want to see the pictures from the wedding. I didn't want to hear about the cake, the dancing, the toasts. I didn't want to know how much it had all cost. I finished my sandwich and washed the plate. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where David had done his homework, where we'd eaten Sunday dinners, where S.A. Ra had paid the bills. I looked at the stack of unpaid bills in the center of the table. The electric bill, the water bill, the medical bills I still owed. I reached for the top one. I opened it. The amount due was more than I had in my checking account. I set it down. I leaned back in my chair. I closed my eyes. I thought about Jessica's words. You're too poor to be mingling. She was right. I was poor. Not just in money. Poor in options. Poor in health. Poor in the kind of wealth that mattered in a world that valued appearances over substance. But I wasn't poor in memory. I wasn't poor in love. I wasn't poor in the things that S.A. Ra had taught me to value. Honesty. H.A. road work. Loyalty. Sacrifice. Those things didn't cost money. They cost something else. Something F.A. are more valuable. I opened my eyes. I looked at the locket in my pocket. I thought about David. About the boy he'd been. About the man he'd become. I wondered if he'd ever understand. If he'd ever realize what he'd lost. What he'd thrown away. I doubted it. I stood up. I walked to the living room. I sat in my recliner, the one with the torn armrest and the permanent indentation for my body. I turned on the lamp. I picked up the book I'd been reading, a thriller I'd borrowed from the library. I tried to read. The words blurred on the page. I set the book down. I looked at the clock. 8:47 p.m. The reception would be in full swing. The champagne would be flowing. The speeches would be rooting. David would be toasting his bride. Jessica would be smiling for the cameras. Barbara would be basking in the reflected glory, and I would be here, alone, in my empty house, with my memories and my regrets. That I closed my eyes again. I tried to sleep, but the words kept echoing in my head. You're too poor to be mingling. That I wondered if that was true. If poverty was a crime. If being broke was a reason to be excluded.
To be dismissed.
To be erased. I didn't have an answer. I only knew that I was tired. Tired of trying. Tired of giving. Tired of being used. That I opened my eyes. I looked at the bills. At the empty house. At the arcade window. That I made a decision. That I stood up. I walked to the kitchen. I picked up the stack of bills. I ride them to the fireplace. I tossed them in. I lit a match. I watched the flames catch, the paper curling and blackening, the ink running like TRS. I watched them burn until there was nothing left but ash. Then I went to bed. I didn't sleep. I just lay there, ring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of my house, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something other than exhaustion. That I felt a spa arcade, small,
faint,
but real. It wasn't anger. It wasn't bitterness. It was something else. Something colder.
Arder.
More determined. That I didn't know what it meant. Not yet, but I knew one thing for certain. The wedding was over, but the reckoning had just begun. Chapter 1 ends. Chapter 2, the smell of burning paper and cold coffee. The house was silent except for the ticking of the mantel clock. I lay in bed, ring at the ceiling, the events of the previous day replaying in my head like a broken film reel. Jessica's words, David's averted gaze, Barbara raw sneer, each frame sharpened by the cold light of dawn filtering through the threadbare curtains. I hadn't slept. Sleep required a peace of mind I no longer possessed. I got up at 5 a.m., my joints aching, my mouth tasting of stale cigarettes and regret. I walked to the kitchen, the linoleum cold under my feet. I filled the kettle, set it on the stove, and lit the burner. The blue flame hissed, a lonely sound in the empty room. I opened the cabinet, pulled out a mug, chipped, faded, a relic from a vacation raw and I had taken to the Poconos 30 years ago, and dropped in a SCUP of instant coffee. The cheapest brand. The kind that came in a plastic tub and tasted like burnt dirt. While the water heated, I walked to the fireplace. The ashes from the bills were cold, gray, and lifeless. I poked at them with the poker, watching the fine powder drift into the air, smelling faintly of sulfur and smoke. I thought about the money those bills represented. Money I owed, money I didn't have, money that had been the source of so much shame. Burning them hadn't solved anything. It was a symbolic act, a petty rebellion against a system that had ground me down. But it had felt necessary, like reclaiming a small piece of my dignity. The kettle whistled. I poured the water into the mug, the coffee dissolving into a murky brown liquid. I didn't bother with cream or sugar. I never did. Luxuries were for people who could afford them. I ride the mug to the kitchen table and sat down, the same chair I'd sat in the night before. The table was now, the bills gone, leaving only faint scorch RKS on the wood. I ran my finger over them, tracing the outlines of my defiance. I sipped the coffee. It was bitter, hot, and terrible, exactly what I deserved. I looked around the kitchen. The peeling paint, the stained sink, the refrigerator humming with a tired rhythm. This house had been my home for 40 years. Raw, and I had bought it when we were young, full of hope and dreams. We'd raised David here. We'd celebrated birthdays, holidays, graduations. We'd weathered job losses, illnesses, and the slow erosion of our savings. This house held every memory of our life together. And now it felt like a tomb. I thought about the wedding, about the Grand Regency, about the cost. I'd done some RCH online. The average cost of a wedding at that venue was upway RDS of $100,000 RS. $100,000 RS. More than I'd rened in 3 RS working the night shift at the factory. More than I had in my retirement account. More than I'd ever see in my lifetime. And I'd been told I was too poor to mingle. The hypocrisy was so thick it made me want to gag. I finished my coffee, the dregs bitter on my tongue. I stood up, rinsed the mug, and set it in the drying rack. I walked to the living room, to my recliner. I sat down, the familiar indentation welcoming me like an old friend. I picked up the remote control, plastic, sticky, with spilled soda, and turned on the TV. I flipped through the channels, landing on a morning news show. The anchor was talking about the economy, about inflation, about the struggles of the middle class. I snorted. Middle class. I hadn't been middle class in years. I was lower. Much lower. I turned off the TV. The silence returned, heavier than before, that I looked at the clock. 6:30 a.m. David would be waking up about now. Probably in a suite at the Regency. Probably ordering room service. Probably scrolling through the pictures from the wedding, smiling at the likes and comments on social media. Would he think of me? Would he wonder where I was? Would he feel a twinge of guilt for the way he'd ignored me? I doubted it. David had changed after college. After he'd met Jessica, he'd become someone else. Someone polished, ambitious, and ruthlessly pragmatic. He'd adopted her values, her worldview, her disdain for anything that didn't contribute to their upway or demobility. He'd stopped calling me dad and sta root calling me EARL. A small change, but significant. A distancing. A rejection. I thought about the last time we talked. Really talked. It had been months ago. Over dinner at a chain restaurant. He'd spent the entire meal talking about his job, his promotions, his investments. He'd asked me about my health, my finances, my life. But his tone was perfunctory, his eyes scanning the room, his attention elsewhere. When I tried to tell him about S.A. Ross locket, about the memories it held, he cut me off, saying he was late for a meeting. He hadn't asked about the locket again. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the locket. I opened it, looking at the picture.
Sarah's smile.
David's young face. So full of promise. So full of potential. What had happened to that boy? Where had he gone? I closed the locket and put it back in my pocket. I stood up, my knees creaking. I walked to the front door. I opened it, stepping out onto the porch. The air was crisp, COL, smelling of damp EARTH and decaying leaves. The street was empty, the houses de arcade. The world still asleep. I looked at my truck, parked at the curb. The old Ford. My only possession of value. I'd bought it used, 10 years ago, for $3,000 RS. It had served me well. It had taken me to work, to the hospital, to the cemetery. It was reliable, sturdy, and honest. Like me. I walked down the steps, my boots crunching on the gravel. I opened the driver's side door, the hinges groaning in protest. I got in, the seat molding to my body. I inserted the key, turned the ignition. The engine coughed, sputtered, then ROA read to life. A comforting sound. A familiar sound that I put the truck in HR and pulled away from the curb. I didn't have a destination. I just drove. Through the empty streets, past the closed shops, past the sleeping town. I drove until I reached the edge of the city, where the buildings gave way to fields, to forests, to the open sky. I pulled over to the side of the road, parking under a large oak tree. I turned off the engine. The silence returned, broken only by the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves. I looked out the window, at the rising sun, at the golden light spreading across the landscape. I thought about my life, about the choices I'd made, about the sacrifices I'd endured, about the man I'd become. That I thought about S.A. Raw, about her laughter, her kindness, her strength. She'd been the anchor of my life. Without her, I'd drifted. I'd tried to hold everything together, to keep the promises I'd made. But I'd failed. I'd failed her. I'd failed David. I'd failed myself. I thought about the reckoning I'd felt the night before. The spa arcade. The determination. What did it mean? What was I supposed to do? I didn't have an answer. But I knew one thing. I couldn't go back to the way things were. I couldn't keep being the convenient father, the silent benefactor, the invisible man. I couldn't keep accepting the scraps of affection, the dismissive Rema RKS, the public humiliations. I had to do something. Something drastic. Something irreversible. I just didn't know what. I sat there for a long time, watching the sun climb higher, the light growing brighter, the shadows shrinking. I thought about the wedding, about the bills, about the locket, about the empty house. I thought about the word poor. Jessica had used it as a weapon, a way to diminish me, to exclude me, to erase me. But maybe she was right. Maybe I was poor. Not just in money. Poor in spirit.
Poor in hope.
Poor in the belief that things could ever be different, but maybe, just maybe, being poor in those things was a kind of freedom. Freedom from the need to impress, to conform, to pretend.
Freedom to be honest.
Freedom to be angry. Freedom to be done. I looked at the locket in my pocket. I thought about David,
About the boy he'd been.
about the man he'd become. I made a decision to root the truck. I turned around, heading back Tawa RD town. But I wasn't going home. Not yet. I was going to the bank. I had a safe deposit box. A small one. I hadn't opened it in years. Not since S.A. Ross' funeral. Inside was a copy of her will, some old photographs, and a letter. A letter she'd written to me. A letter I'd never been able to bring myself to read. Today, I would read it. I didn't know what it would say.
I didn't know what it would change.
But I knew I needed to hear her voice again. One last time. I drove with a purpose now, the truck accelerating, the engine humming. The reckoning was no longer just a spa RK. It was a flame. And it was growing. Chapter 2 ends. Chapter 3. The smell of old paper and dry ink. The First National Bank of Millwood didn't open until 9, but I was there at 8:30, sitting in my truck in the mostly empty parking lot. I watched the lights flicker on inside, the fluorescent hum audible even through the closed windows. A middle-aged woman in a navy blazer arrived, unlocking the main doors with a key ring that jangled in the quiet morning air. She didn't notice me. I preferred it that way. At 9 Shaw RP, I got out, my boots scuffing the asphalt. The air inside the bank was cool and smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, an old Sierra pet. The woman at the front desk, Ms. Henderson, according to her nameplate, glanced up, her expression shifting from polite neutrality to something akin to recognition mixed with mild disapproval. She knew me. Everyone in this town knew everyone, especially the ones who'd fallen on hard times. Mr. Miller, she said, her tone fully modulated. How can I help you today?
Safe deposit box, I said.
My voice was hoa RSE from the cigarettes, the lack of sleep, the weight of the morning. Number 412. She hesitated. Do you have your key? I pulled the small brass key from my keychain. It was tarnished, the grooves worn smooth from years of handling. I set it on the counter. She picked it up, examining it, then nodded. Follow me, please. She led me through a security door, past rows of gray metal boxes embedded in concrete walls. The air grew colder here, smelling of metal and dust. She stopped at box 412, inserted her master key, then gestured for me to use mine. I did, the mechanism stiff, resisting. I turned it, the tumblers clicking into place. I pulled the door open. Inside was a single metal box, long and flat. I removed it, the metal COL against my palms. Ms. Henderson stepped back, giving me privacy. Take your time, Mr. Miller. Ring the bell when you're finished. I ride the box to a small wooden table in the corner of the vault. I set it down, my hands trembling slightly. I lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in acid-free tissue paper, were the items I remembered. S.A. Ross will. The photographs from REARLYORS. A small velvet pouch containing her wedding ring, which I never had the HRT to sell. And beneath them, a plain white envelope. No return address.
No stamp.
Just my name, written in S.A. Ross neat, looping script. EARL. I picked up the envelope. It was heavier than it looked. I turned it over. The flap was sealed with wax, imprinted with the initial S. I ran my thumb over it, feeling the ridges, the texture. It was brittle, ancient. I broke the seal, the wax crumbling onto the table. I pulled out the letter. It was several pages long, written on both sides of the paper. The ink was faded, a dark brown, the paper yellowed with age. I unfolded it ruefully, the fibers crackling. I began to read. My DA rest EARL. If you're reading this, then I'm gone. And you're alone.
I'm so sorry for that.
Sorry for leaving you with the burden of everything, the bills, the house, and most of all, David, I've thought about this letter for a long time. What to say, how to explain. But the truth is, there are no explanations for what's happening to me, or for what will happen to you. Only truths. The first truth is about David. I love him more than my own life, but I worry about him. He's a good boy, EARL, kind and SMART. But he's also impressionable. He wants to succeed. He wants to be more than we are, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I fear he'll lose himself in that wanting. He'll start to believe that worth is measured in dollars, not in deeds. I need you to watch him, to remind him of who he is, of where he comes from, of what truly matters. That the second truth is about you. You've always been the strong one, EARL. The one who fixes things, who provides, who never complains. But you also hide. You hide your pain, your fears, your needs. You think it's strength. Sometimes it is. But sometimes it's a prison. You need to let people in, EARL. You need to let yourself be helped. And you need to help yourself. Don't spend your last years scraping by to give him things he doesn't need. Save yourself. For once, save yourself. The third truth is about our money. Or lack thereof. I know we've spent everything on my treatments. I know we're leaving you with nothing. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for the debt, for the worry, for the future we won't have. But I don't regret a single penny. I'd spend it all again for one more day with you. With David. Don't let that debt define you. Don't let it break you. It's just money. It comes and goes. But you, EARL, you are irreplaceable. There's one more thing. Something I haven't told you. Something I did. A long time ago. Before we were married. I inherited a small piece of land. In West Virginia. A few acres. Nothing fancy. Just woods and a creek. I never told you because I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to keep it as a secret, a piece of myself. Maybe I was afraid you'd make me sell it to pay bills. But it's there. In my name. The deed is in this box. I want you to have it. I want you to go there. To leave this town. To leave the memories. To start over. It's paid for.
No taxes owed.
Just go to EARL. I'm asking you to do something hard. I'm asking you to let go.
Of me.
Of David. Of the life we built. It's over. It's done. And you deserve a chance to be happy. Not as a father. Not as a husband. But as EARL. Just EARL. I love you. More than words can say. Thank you for everything. Thank you for being my rock. My love. My life. That always say. I finished reading. The letter trembled in my hands. My vision blurred. I blinked. The TRS spilling over. Hot and stinging. Onto the faded ink. I read it again. And again. Each word a hammer blow to my chest. She'd known. She'd known everything. About David. About me. About the money. About the future. And she'd left me a way out. A piece of land in West Virginia. Paid for.
Start.
I looked at the date on the letter. It was written 3 months before she died. She'd hidden this from me. For 3 months. Why? To protect me, to give me an option, or because she knew I'd never take it. I thought about the wedding. About Jessica's words. About David's silence. About the bills I'd burned. Ra had been right. I had hidden. I had sacrificed. I had destroyed myself for a son who no longer valued me. I had clung to a past that was gone, a memory that was fading, a promise that had become a chain. And now, she was giving me the key to that chain. That I reached into the box. Beneath the letter was a manila envelope. I opened it. Inside was a deed. A warranty deed. For a parcel of land in Tucker County, West Virginia. Legal description. Map Seago ordinates. The works. It was all there. Ra Elizabeth Miller. Sole owner.
No liens.
No encumbrances. ISTA read at it. The paper felt heavy in my hands. A tangible piece of her last wish. That I thought about West Virginia. I'd never been there. I didn't know anyone there. It was just woods and creeks and silence. Exactly what I needed. I thought about David. What would he do if I left? Would he would he notice? Would he even come looking? I doubted it. He had his new life.
His wife.
His CA rear. His social circle. He didn't need me. He'd made that clear. I thought about the reckoning. The spa arcade. The flame. This was it. This was the answer. The way out. The fresh start. But it was also an ending. An ending to my role as a father. An ending to my connection to David. An ending to the life I'd known. Could I do it? Could I just walk away? I didn't know that. I looked at the letter again. S.A. Ross words. Save yourself. For once, save yourself. I folded the letter CA refully, placing it back in its envelope. I put the deed back in the manila envelope. I wrapped them both in the tissue paper, placing them back in the box. I closed the lid. I stood up, ring the box to the safe deposit box. I inserted it, sliding it back into the slot. I locked it. I handed the key to Ms. Henderson, who was waiting discreetly by the vault door. All finished, Mr. Miller? Yes, I said. My voice was steadier now. All finished. I walked out of the bank. The sun was higher now. The day war mare. I got back in my truck. I sat there for a long time, the engine idling, the deed and the letter burning a hole in my pocket. Even though they were safely locked away, I thought about S.A. Ross' words. Just EARL that I looked at myself in the REA review mirror. An old man, tired eyes, gray hair, worn-out clothes. A lifetime of sacrifice etched into his face. That I thought about the wedding, about the humiliation, about the future. I made a decision that I rued the truck. I pulled out of the bank parking lot. But I didn't go home. I didn't go to the cemetery. I drove to the edge of town, to the bus station. I parked the truck. I got out. I walked inside. The station was small, smelling of diesel and old coffee. A single clerk sat behind a plexiglass window, reading a magazine. That I walked up to the window. One ticket, I said. To Pierre Sons, West Virginia. One way. The clerk looked up, his expression bored. When?
Tomorrow morning, I said.
First bus out. He punched some keys. That'll be $87 RS and 50 cents. I reached into my wallet. I had $100 RS in cash. The last of my money. I counted it out, sliding the bills under the window. He handed me a ticket. A small, rectangular piece of paper. My freedom. I looked at the ticket. Pierre Sons, West Virginia. Departure, 7:15 a.m. I folded the ticket and put it in my pocket, next to the key to the safe deposit box. I walked back to my truck. I got in. I sat there, holding the steering wheel, looking at the bus station, at the ticket, at the future. I thought about David, about what he'd say when he found out I was gone, about the look on his face, about the words he'd never say. That I thought about Jessica, about her reaction, about the gossip in the town. That I thought about S.A. Raw, about her letter, about her wish. Route the truck. I drove home. But this time, the house didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a temporary stop, a place I was leaving behind. That I went inside. I walked to the kitchen. I looked at the table, at the scorched RKS. I thought about the bills I'd burned, about the money I'd spent on the wedding programs, about the $100 RS I'd just spent on a bus ticket. I was poor, poorer than I'd ever been. But for the first time in a long time, I felt rich. Rich in purpose, rich in CLA righty, rich in the knowledge that I was finally saving myself. I walked to the living room. I sat in my recliner. I closed my eyes. Tomorrow I would leave. Tomorrow I would become just EARL, and I wouldn't look back. Chapter 3 ends. Chapter 4. The smell of diesel and dusty vinyl. The alarm on my phone went off at 5 a.m. I hadn't slept, but I didn't need sleep. I felt a strange, electric alertness, like a man who'd been drowning and had finally broken the surface. I got up, moving quietly through the house. I packed a small duffel bag, 2 changes of clothes, my toiletry kit, the locket, and S.A. Ross letter. I didn't bother with much else. The furniture, the dishes, the photographs, none of it mattered anymore. It was all just weight. I walked through the empty rooms one last time. The kitchen, with its peeling linoleum and the scorched RKS on the table. The living room, with the recliner molded to my shape. David's old bedroom, now a storage space for boxes of things he hadn't bothered to take when he moved out. I opened one of the boxes. Inside were his high school trophies, his comic books, his old baseball glove. I touched the glove, the leather cracked and stiff. I remembered playing catch with him in the backyard, the summer sun on our backs, the sound of the ball popping into the leather. That boy was gone. The man who'd replaced him didn't want this glove.
He didn't want any of this.
I closed the box. I walked to the front door. I didn't leave a note. There was nothing to say. David would figure it out eventually. He'd call, I wouldn't answer, and he'd come over. He'd find the house empty, the utilities cut off, the mail piling up.
He'd know.
And he'd know why I stepped out onto the porch, locking the door behind me. The key felt heavy in my hand. I looked at it for a long moment, then I dropped it into the mailbox. Let the next owner deal with it. I walked to my truck. I opened the door, tossing the duffel bag onto the passenger seat. I got in. STA rooted the engine. The Familia ROA was a comfort. I put it in HEA and pulled away from the curb for the last time. I didn't look back at the house. I kept my eyes on the road ahead. I drove to the bus station. It was deserted at this hour, the pre-dawn darkness still thick, the streetlights casting long, lonely shadows. I parked the truck in the FAR corner of the lot, under a flickering streetlight. I got out, popping the hood. I propped it open with the rod, making it look like the truck had broken down. It was a small act of theater, but it might buy me a little time before anyone realized I was gone for good. I walked to the bus station entrance. The same clerk was behind the window, looking even more bored than he had the day before. He glanced up as I approached, his eyes flicking to the duffel bag. "Miller?" he asked, his voice raspy. "Yeah," I said. He slid a boa riding pass under the window.
Got the tool.
"Bus is boa riding now." I picked up the pass. It was a simple slip of paper, my name, the destination, the seat number. 14A, a window seat. Appropriate. I walked to gate 2. The bus was a Greyhound, long and silver, its engine idling, the exhaust smelling of diesel and ozone. A few other passengers were milling about. A woman with 3 kids, a man in a construction uniform, an elderly couple clutching Bibles. No one looked at me. No one read. I boa ride the bus, showing my pass to the driver, a stout woman with a buzz cut and a no-nonsense expression. She grunted, waving me on. I walked down the aisle, the floor sticky under my boots. I found seat 14A. I stowed my bag in the overhead bin and sat down. The seat was vinyl, cracked and stained, smelling of sweat and cheap cleaner. I leaned back, the seat cushion thin and unyielding. The bus filled up quickly. The woman with the kids struggled to get them settled. The construction workers sprawled out, taking up 2 seats. The elderly couple prayed quietly. The engine revved, the air brakes hissed, and we pulled away from the station. I watched the town I'd lived in for 40 years recede into the distance. The Familia, our streets, the shops, the houses, the church steeple. It all grew smaller, blurrier, until it was just a collection of shapes on the horizon. I felt a pang, a tightness in my chest. But it wasn't regret. It was relief that the bus merged onto the interstate. The speed increased, the landscape blurring past fields, forests, Bilboa RDS, gas stations. I watched it all, my forehead resting against the CUL glass of the window. The vibration of the engine was a steady, monotonous hum, lulling, hypnotic. We made our first stop an hour later, at a rest area. The driver announced a 15-minute break. People got up, stretching, using the restrooms, buying snacks from the vending machines. I stayed in my seat. I wasn't hungry. I didn't need to stretch. I just wanted to keep moving. A man sat down in the seat next to me. He was in his 60s, balding, with a paunch and a friendly face. He offered me a bag of peanuts. "Want some?" I shook my head. "No, thanks." He shrugged, opening the bag, crunching loudly. "Long trip?" he asked, his mouth full. "West Virginia," I said. He said. "Pretty country. Rough roads. You visiting family?" No, I said. Just going. He looked at me, his eyes shrewd. He didn't press. He just nodded, finishing his peanuts, balling up the bag and tossing it into the trash under the seat. SMART, he said. Sometimes you just gotta go. He got up when the driver called for Boa riding, moving to another seat. I was alone again. The bus continued its journey. The hours passed. We stopped at more restaurants, at a truck stop for lunch, at a small town to pick up more passengers. The scenery changed, the flatlands of Pennsylvania giving way to the rolling hills of Maryland, the hills becoming mountains as we entered West Virginia. The air grew cooler, the trees thicker, the roads narrower and more winding. I watched it all, a silent observer. I thought about David,
About what he was doing right now.
probably sleeping in, nursing a hangover from the wedding festivities. Probably checking his phone, scrolling through social media, basking in the glow of his new status.
He wouldn't be thinking about me.
Not yet. I thought about Jessica, about her reaction when she realized I was gone. The shock, the anger, the calculation. She'd be furious. Not because she read about me, but because my Disape rants was a disruption to her fully constructed image. A loose end, a problem to be managed. I thought about Bara, about her smug satisfaction. She'd probably say it was for the best, that I'd finally done something right by getting out of their way. I thought about Raw, about her letter, about her wish, about the land in Tucker County. I wondered what it looked like. Was it as peaceful as she described? Was the creek as clear, or were the woods as quiet? I hoped so. I needed it to be. I needed a place where the noise of the world couldn't reach me, where the memories couldn't haunt me, where I could just be EARL. The bus climbed higher into the mountains. The road was a series of switchbacks, the drops steep, the views breathtaking. I saw valleys shrouded in mist, rivers arving through rock, forests of oak and maple blazing with autumn color. It was beautiful.
Sta RK, unforgiving.
And exactly what I needed. We reached Pa Sons at dusk. The town was small, nestled in a valley, the streets lined with old brick buildings, the air smelling of wood smoke and damp artage. The bus pulled into the station, a single platform with a small shelter. The driver announced the stop. People began gathering their belongings, shuffling Tawa RD the exit. I stood up, retrieving my duffel bag from the overhead bin. My legs were stiff from the long ride. I walked down the aisle, the vinyl floor sticking to my boots. I stepped off the bus, onto the platform. The air was crisp, rieing the scent of pine and decay. The sky was a deep indigo, the first stars ape ring. I looked around. The town was quiet. A few cars passed on the main street. A dog rooked in the distance. A light shone in the window of a diner. It felt like a different world. A world away from the noise and the crowds and the expectations. I walked to the edge of the platform, looking out at the receding mountains. I felt a sense of peace settle over me. A deep, profound calm. I was here.
I had arrived.
And I was alone. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know how to find the land, how to survive the winter, how to rebuild a life from nothing. But I didn't I would figure it out. One step at a time. One day at a time. I tightened my grip on the duffel bag. I walked Tawa RD the main street, Tawa RD the diner, Tawa RD the unknown. I was just EARL now. And I was finally free. Chapter 4 ends. Chapter 5. The smell of pine needles and wet RTHPA Sons was smaller than it had looked from the bus. Main Street was 2 blocks of aging brick storefronts, a hot RDWA restore with a faded awning, a B8 burr shop with a striped pole, a diner with a neon sign that buzzed and flickered. A single traffic light hung at the intersection, cycling pointlessly in the twilight. I walked past a Boa ride-up movie theater, the Marquee still advertising a film from 3 years ago. The air was RP with the scent of pine and the damp, mineral smell of the river that ran behind the town. I found a small motel on the edge of town, the Hilltop Motor Lodge. It was a single-story building with peeling blue paint and a row of doors facing a gravel parking lot. A flickering vacancy, sign hummed in the window. I went inside the office. A bell rang. A man in a stained flannel shirt looked up from a newspaper. He was in his 70s, with a weathered face and cloudy eyes. "Room?" he asked, his voice a low rasp. "Yeah," I said.
For a few nights.
He nodded, sliding a registration card across the counter. $30 a night. Cash only.
No pets.
I filled out the card with a fake name, EARL Walker. I paid for 3 nights in advance, counting out the bills from my dwindling stack. He handed me a key on a heavy brass fob. Room 7. End of the row. Ice machines by the office. A coffee in the morning. I took the key and walked to room 7. The room was small, smelling of disinfectant and stale tobacco. A double bed with a faded floral bedspread, a nightstand with a lamp, a dresser with a cracked mirror, and a bathroom with a chipped porcelain sink and a shower stall with a plastic curtain. It was clean enough. It would do. I set my duffel bag on the bed. I sat down, the mattress creaking under my weight. I looked around the room. It was a far cry from the Grand Regency. But it was mine. No one could tell me I was too poor to be here. No one could dismiss me. No one could ignore me that I stayed in the room for an hour, just sitting listening to the silence. It was a different kind of silence than the one at home. That silence had been heavy, oppressive, filled with memories and regrets. This silence was clean, empty, expectant. I got up and walked to the window. I pushed back the curtain. The parking lot was empty except for my truck, still sitting forlornly under the streetlight at the bus station. I'd have to deal with that tomorrow. For now, I needed to focus on the task at hand. Finding the land, I pulled out S.A. Ross' letter and the deed. I studied the legal description, the map, coordinates.
Tucker County.
P.A. Sons was the county seat. The land was about 10 miles north, in a place called Dry Fork. I'd need a map and directions. I left the room, locking the door behind me. I walked back to Main Street. The diner was still open. A few cars parked out front. I went inside. The smell of frying grease and coffee hit me. The place was half full, locals mostly, judging by the way they greeted each other, the conversations about hunting seasons and town politics that I sat at the counter. A waitress with gray hair and a tired smile came over. "What can I get ya, hon?" "Coffee," I said. "And a map of the county, if you have one." She raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment. She poured me a cup of coffee, the liquid black and steaming. "Maps on the wall there, by the register. Tourist one. Shows all the back roads." I thanked her. I took my coffee and walked to the map. It was a large, colorful map, pinned to a corkbow road. I studied it, tracing the routes with my finger.
Pattersons.
Dry Fork. Forest Service roads. The Cheat River. I found the general array of the land. A green patch labeled National Forest, adjacent to a smaller, unlabeled parcel. That had to be it. I went back to the counter, sipping my coffee. It was strong and bitter, but it was hot. The waitress came back. "Find what you needed?"
"Yeah," I said.
"Thanks. I'll have a burger. Medium. Fries." She nodded, jotting it down. "You passing through?" "No," I said. "Just arrived. Looking for some property." She looked at me, her eyes assessing. "Property around here's cheap. But it's rough. No utilities. No roads. Just woods." "I know," I said. She didn't ask any more questions. She walked away, placing my order with the COK. I drank my coffee, watching the locals. They were a different breed here. Rugged, self-reliant, wary of outsiders. I'd have to be CA refull. I'd have to prove myself. Or stay invisible. My burger came. It was greasy, the fries soggy, but it was food. I ate it slowly, my hunger finally catching up with me. I listened to the conversations around me. Talk of the upcoming election, the price of timber, a recent BEAR sighting. It was a world away from the wedding talk, the stock market updates, the designer labels of David's world. I finished my meal, paid the check with cash, and left a small tip. I walked back to the motel. The night air colder now, the stars brighter. I got to my room, undressed, and lay down on the bed. The springs groaned. I sta read at the ceiling, the shadows from the flickering vacancy sign dancing on the plaster. I thought about the land, about what it would take to get there. I'd need a vehicle. My truck was useless where it was. I'd have to go back for it. Or buy something else. Something with four-wheel drive. Something that could handle the mountain roads. I thought about the winter. West Virginia winters were hot RSH. Snow, ice, freezing temperatures. I'd need supplies.
Food.
Fuel. WARM clothes. A way to heat the cabin if there was a cabin. S.A. Ross' letter hadn't mentioned a cabin.
Just land.
Woods and a creek. I'd have to find out. Tomorrow. I closed my eyes. Sleep came slowly, fitfully. I dreamed of S.A. Raw. She was standing in a clear ring, by a creek, the water rushing over rocks. She was smiling, waving at me. I tried to reach her, but my feet were stuck in mud. I woke up, my heart pounding, the dream vivid. The image of her smile burned into my mind. I got up, using the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were bloodshot, my face gaunt. I looked like a man who'd been through a war, and in a way I had. I went back to bed. I lay awake until dawn, listening to the sounds of the motel, a truck sta rooting, a door slamming, the distant howl of a dog. I thought about David, about what he was doing. He'd be awake by now, getting ready for work, checking his phone. He'd see my missed calls, my unreturned texts. He'd wonder. He'd call Jessica. She'd call BARBARA. They'd START to worry. Or maybe they'd just be annoyed that I didn't see a re. Not anymore, that I thought about S.A. Ross' letter. Just DARL. I was becoming him. Slowly. Painfully. But surely. At first light, I got up. I dressed, packed my bag, and checked out of the motel. The old man at the desk didn't say a word. He just took the key and grunted. I walked to the bus station. My truck was still there, looking lonely and abandoned. I got in, sta rooted the engine. It ROA read to life. A comforting sound. I drove back to the center of town, to a small auto repair shop I'd seen the day before. A sign in the window read, UCARS for sale. I parked and went inside. A mechanic in grease-stained overalls looked up from under the hood of a pickup. Help you? Looking for a four-wheel drive, I said. Something cheap. Something that runs. He wiped his hands on a rag. Got a 98 Cherokee. Runs good. Needs some work. $1,200. I'll take it, I said. He raised an eyebrow. You want to test drive it? No, I said. I'll take your word for it. He shrugged. Suit yourself. I paid him in cash. He handed me the title and the keys. I transferred my belongings from the truck to the Jeep. The interior was filthy, smelling of oil and wet dog, but the engine sounded solid. I drove the truck to the edge of town, to a junkie RD I'd passed. I sold it for scrap. $200 RS. Better than nothing. I drove the Jeep back to the motel. I parked it, then walked to the diner. I ate breakfast, eggs, bacon, toast, drank more coffee, and studied the map again. I bought a topographic map of Tucker County from the waitress for $5 RS. It was detailed, showing every contour, every stream, every logging road. I spent the morning planning my route. The land was accessible only by a Forest Service road that was gated in the winter. It was October. I had maybe a month before the snows hit. I had to get there, assess the situation, and preparatory for the winter. I bought supplies at the hot RDWA restore, a shovel, an axe, a saw, a kerosene heater, a lantern, fuel, matches. I bought food at the grocery store, canned goods, rice, beans, flour, salt, sugar R. I bought RM clothes at a thrift store, wool sweaters, flannel shirts, insulated coveralls, a heavy coat, gloves, a hat. I spent the last of my cash. I had maybe $50 RS left. I loaded everything into the Jeep. It was crammed full, the suspension sagging. I looked at it, at the pile of supplies, at the map, at the deed. I was ready as I'd ever be. I got in the Jeep. I sta rooted the engine. I pulled out of the parking lot, heading north, Tawa RD Dry Fork. Tawa rode the land. Tawa rode my new life. The road was paved at first, then turned to gravel, then to dirt. It climbed steadily into the mountains, the forest thickening around me, the trees towering overhead, the sunlight filtering through the branches in shifting patterns. The air grew colder, the scent of pine stronger. I drove for an hour, following the map, checking the Laname Arques, a fork in the road, a fallen log, a distinctive rock formation. I found the turnoff a narrow, overgrown track, ba rely visible. I turned onto it, the jeep bouncing over roots and rocks, the undergrowth scraping the sides. I drove for another mile, the track getting rougher, steeper. Then suddenly it ended. I'd reached a clear ring, and there, in the center of the clear ring, was a small cabin, weathered, gray, with a stone chimney and a sagging roof. And next to it, a creek, the water rushing over rocks, clear, and cold. Did I stop the jeep? I sat there for a long moment, sta ring at the cabin, at the creek, at the woods surrounding them. It was real. It was here. Sa Ross land. I got out of the jeep. I walked to the cabin. The door was hanging by a single hinge, the windows boa ried up. I pushed it open, the wood groaning. I stepped inside. It was one room, a dirt floor, a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, a shelf, a bed frame. No glass in the windows. No flor boa rdc. Just EARTH and stone. I looked around. It was a ruin, but it was shelter. It was a START. I walked to the creek. I knelt down, cupping my hands, drinking the water. It was icy, pure, the best water I'd ever tasted. I stood up, looking at the mountains, at the sky, at the land that was now mine. I was alone. I was poor. I was sta rooting over at 70 years old, but I was free. I walked back to the jeep. I began unloading my supplies. I had work to do, a cabin to repair, a winter to survive, a life to rebuild. I was just EARL. And this was my home. Chapter 5 ends. Chapter 6. The smell of creosote and rotting wood. The first week on the land was a blur of physical labor that left my body aching in ways I hadn't known possible. I sta root with the basics. Clea ring the debris from the cabin, T ring down the rotten boa RDS, and assessing the structural integrity of the frame. The cabin was old, built with hand-hewn logs and chinked with mud and moss. The roof was the worst part. Half the shakes were missing or curled, and the rafters were spongy with dry rot. I spent 3 days just clearing the debris and patching the holes with tar peas I'd bought in town, a temporary fix until I could mill new shakes. I built a fire pit outside, using stones from the creek bed. I gathered deadfall, pine branches, birch logs, anything dry enough to burn. Sta rooting a fire with wet wood was a lesson in patience. I used the kerosene for my supplies to get it going, the smell of burning fuel mixing with the pine smoke, a hot RSH, acrid scent that eventually gave way to the clean, resinous smell of burning wood. I had my first meal over that fire, beans and rice, heated in a battered pot I'd bought at the thrift store. It tasted like ash and dirt, but it was hot and it was food. The water from the creek was pure, but I boiled it anyway just to be safe. I filled every container I had, plastic jugs, pots, buckets, and set them by the fire to purify. I washed in the creek, the water so cold it stole my breath, my skin turning blue and numb within minutes. I rened to wash quickly, scrubbing with a bar of lye soap that left my skin raw and stinging. I slept in the jeep for the first few nights, the seats pushed back, a pile of blankets and my coat serving as bedding. The nights were brutally cold, the temperature dropping below freezing. I woke up each morning with frost on the inside of the windows, my breath visible in the air. The silence was absolute, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the distant howl of a coyote. It was a silence that pressed in on you, a silence that forced you to confront your own thoughts. I spent my days working on the cabin. I used the axe and saw to cut and trim branches, creating a pile of kindling and firewood. I repaired the door, rehanging it on its hinges, adding a new latch made from a leather strap and a wooden peg. I read the brush away from the walls, exposing the foundation to the sun and air, hoping to dry out the rot. I patched the worst of the holes in the chinking with clay I dug from the creek bank, mixing it with straw to bind it. It was crude work, but it was effective. The cabin began to feel less like a ruin and more like a shelter. I explored the land. I walked the perimeter, following the creek upstream, marking the boundary rise with strips of cloth tied to branches. The land was about 10 acres, mostly forested with oak, maple, and pine. There was a small meadow to the south, filled with tall grass and wildflowers. I saw deer tracks, RACCON tracks, and the distinctive paw prints of a bobcat. I saw a black bear once, a large male, foraging for acorns. I stood very still, my heart pounding, until he ambled away, uninterested in me. I found a small, overgrown den plot behind the cabin, marked by the remains of a rusted fence. I read it, pulling weeds, turning the soil with a shovel I'd bought at the hardwa restore. I planted the seeds I'd brought, beans, squash, potatoes. It was late in the season, but I hoped for a small harvest before the frost. I knew nothing about gardening, but I'd watched Ra do it enough times. I figured it out as I went along, learning from my mistakes, adjusting my methods that I saw no one for the first 10 days. Then, on the 11th day, I had a visitor. I was splitting wood when I heard the sound of an engine, a truck, laboring up the rough track. I stopped, my axe raised, my body tensing. I hadn't expected anyone. I hadn't wanted anyone. A battered green pickup truck read at the edge of the clear ring. It was an old Ford, similar to mine, but in better condition. A man got out. He was in his 50s, lean, with a beard and calloused hands. He wore a canvas jacket and a John Deere cap. He looked at me, at the cabin, at the Jeep, his expression neutral. "Afternoon," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Afternoon," I replied, lowering the axe but keeping it in my hand. He walked closer, stopping a respectful distance away. He looked at the repairs I'd made. "Fixing her up, I see." "Trying to," I said. "Name's Tom Abernathy," he said. "I own the land adjoining yours to the west. Used to hunt these paw artists. Knew the woman who owned this place. S.A. Ra Miller." I felt a jolt at the mention of her name. "You knew S.A. Ra?" "Knew of her," he said. "Met her a few times. Nice lady. Kept to herself. Said she had family up north. Guess that's you." "I'm her husband," I said. The words felt strange on my tongue. Husband. A title I hadn't used in years. He nodded. "Figured as much. Saw your truck at the hilltop. Wondered when someone would show up. Place has been empty a long time." He looked around the clearing. "You're gonna need help. Winter's coming fast. That roof won't hold a heavy snow. And you're low on firewood. That pile you got there'll last you a week, maybe 2. "I'm managing," I said. It was a lie. I was rely managing. He didn't call me on it. He just nodded. "I got some extra shingles. Left over from my RN roof. You can have 'em. And I can spare a cord of wood. Split and seasoned. Best take it now, before the snow flies." I looked at him. I didn't trust him. I didn't trust anyone. But I needed the help. And he knew S.A. Ra. That counted for something. "I appreciate it," I said. "No need to appreciate it," he said. "Just neighborly. Out here, you help each other, or you don't survive. Simple as that." He walked back to his truck, pulling out a folded map. He spread it on the hood, pointing to a spot. "I'll bring the wood and shingles tomorrow morning. You got a way to haul?" "I've got the Jeep," I said. "Good enough. Meet me at the gate to my property. That track of yours is too rough for my truck. I'll show you the way." He folded the map, tucking it back into his pocket. "One more thing. You're gonna need a way to keep that fire going all night. That kerosene heater's a fire hazard in a place like this. You need a proper wood stove. I got an old one in my BAR and works good. You can have it for $50.
Cash.
$50 RS. I had $50 RS left. It would clean me out. But I needed that stove. I knew he was right. The kerosene was dangerous, and it wouldn't last the winter. "Deal," I said. He nodded. "See you tomorrow then." EARL, was it? EARL? I confirmed. EARL, he repeated. Welcome to Tucker County. He got back in his truck and drove away, the sound of his engine fading into the forest. I stood there for a long time, looking at the spot where he'd been. Tom Abernathy, a neighbor, the first person I'd spoken to since arriving. He was offering help, but it came with a price, my last $50 RS and a dependence on him. I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. I went back to splitting wood, my movements mechanical, my mind racing. I thought about S.A. Raw, about how she'd known Tom, about why she'd never mentioned him, about what else she hadn't told me that I thought about David, about what he'd think if he could see me now, splitting wood in the wilderness, trading my last dollar RS for a used wood stove. He'd be horrified. Or maybe he'd just be relieved. One less burden to worry about. Did I finish splitting the wood, stacking it neatly against the side of the cabin? I went to the creek, washing the sweat and grime from my body, the water colder than ever. I built up the fire, adding more wood, watching the flames leap and dance. I had my dinner, ate it in silence, STA ring into the fire. That night, I slept in the cabin for the first time. I read a space on the dirt floor, laying down a tarp and my pile of blankets. I built a small fire in the fireplace, feeding it regular RLY to keep it going. The smoke stung my eyes, the heat was uneven, and the floor was hot RD and cold. But I was inside. I was out of the wind and the rain. It felt like a victory. I lay there, listening to the sounds of the forest, the crackle of the fire, the rush of the creek. I thought about Tom's offer, about the wood stove, about the winter, about surviving. I was just EARL, and I was learning how to live again. One fire, one log, one day at a time. Chapter 6 ends. Chapter 7. The smell of wood smoke and burning kerosene. Tom Abernathy arrived at first light, his green pickup towing a small trailer piled high with firewood. The shingles were stacked neatly on top, covered with a tarp. He got out, nodding a greeting, and walked to the back of the trailer. Morning, EARL. Got your wood. And the shingles. Stoves in the back of the truck. I helped him unload the wood, ryeing the seasoned oak logs and stacking them against the side of the cabin. It was back-breaking work, but the wood was dry and heavy, the kind that would burn slow and hot. We stacked it in 2 rows, a cord in total, enough to last me a month if I was refull. Then we unloaded the shingles. They were Standa RD asphalt shingles, left over from a roofing job, still in their bundles. Tom showed me how to lay them, overlapping each row, nailing them down with a hammer and roofing nails. START at the bottom, he instructed, his voice gruff but patient. Overlap by half. Nail every shingle 4 times. Don't skimp on the nails. Windle TRM off if you do. I listened, watching his hands, memorizing the technique. I'd never done roofing before. It looked simple, but it required precision and strength. My hands were already blistered from the axe, and the hammering made them ache. But I didn't complain. I needed this. I needed the roof fixed before the snow. We moved the stove next. It was an old cast-iron beast, heavy and black, with a rusted door and a cracked fire brick. Tom showed me how to install it, how to cut a hole in the roof for the chimney, how to seal it with flashing and caulk. You need a RTH, he said, pointing to the dirt floor. Can't set that on dirt. Fire'll spread. Use stones from the creek. Build a base. 2 feet out, 2 feet to the sides. Minimum. I spent the rest of the morning building the RTH, hauling flat stones from the creek bed, fitting them together like a puzzle, filling the gaps with clay. It was meticulous work, requiring patience and an eye for detail. By noon, the RTH was complete, a solid, level base for the stove. Tom helped me lift the stove onto the RT. It was a struggle, the cast iron aquay RD and heavy, but we managed it. He connected the stovepipe, feeding it through the hole in the roof, sealing the joints with a mixture of clay and water. Check the pipe every week, Ned. Make sure it's clear. Creosote builds up, causes chimney fires, and that'll burn this place down faster than you can blink. I nodded, filing away the information. I was Leah running fast. Survival required constant vigilance, constant maintenance, constant Leah running. By late afternoon, the roof was half-shingled, the stove was installed, and the woodpile was stacked. Tom wiped his hands on his jeans, looking at the cabin with a critical eye. Good start, he said. Still got a lot to do. Chinking needs more work. Windows need glass. Door needs a better latch. But it'll keep you alive for now. He walked to his truck, pulling out a small, cloth-bound book. He handed it to me. Foxfire book, he said. About living off the land. Redeeming, building, preserving. Useful stuff. Read it. I took the book, looking at the cover. It was worn, the pages yellowed. I appreciate it, Tom. Don't mention it, he said. Just paying back a favor. Ra helped my wife when she was sick. Brought her soup, sat with her. Didn't ask for nothing. Just helped. That's the way she was. He looked at me, his eyes sharp. You're not her EARL. But you're here now. And you're trying. That counts for something. He got back in his truck. I'll be back in a week. Check on your progress. Bring you some venison. Hunting season's open. Got a buck yesterday. Meat's good. Better than those beans you're eating. He rooted the engine, backing the truck around. He paused, looking at me through the open window. One more thing. There's a spring up the hill, about a root a mile. Water's cold and clean. Better than the creek. Follow the pipe. You'll find it. Save you some hauling. He drove away, leaving me standing in the clear ring, surrounded by shingles, wood, and the beginnings of a home. I looked at the book in my hand, then at the cabin. It was still a long way from finished, but it was better than it had been. It was functional. It was mine. I spent the next week working nonstop. I finished shingling the roof, patching the remaining holes in the chinking, and building a proper latch for the door. I followed the pipe up the hill and found the spring, a small, bubbling pool of water, piped into a rusted trough. The water was ice cold, clear, rare than the creek. I read the debris from the trough, laying a pipe down to the cabin, creating a gravity-fed water system. It wasn't much, but it was easier than hauling water from the creek that I read the Foxfire book by the light of the kerosene lantern, Leah running about root cella RS, smokehouses, and herbal remedies. I applied what I Leah rened, digging a small pit in the ground for a root cella, lining it with stones, covering it with a wooden plank. I smoked some of the venison Tom brought, hanging the strips of meat over the fire, the smoke preserving it, the flavor intense and gamey. I saw Tom again the next week, as promised. He brought more venison, a sack of potatoes, and a bag of apples. He inspected my work, nodding approvingly. Good job on the spring. And the chinking. Holding up well. You're Leah running fast. He stayed for a while, sitting by the fire, shawring the venison, talking about the land, the weather, the history of the array. He told me stories of the old-timers, the moonshiners, the loggers who'd worked these mountains. He told me about Ra, how she'd come here as a young woman, seeking solitude, how she'd planted the Garden, how she'd loved the silence. She was a private woman, he said. Didn't talk much. But she was kind. And she knew these woods better than anyone. I listened, soaking in the information, the history, the connection to Ra. It was like piecing together a puzzle, each story a fragment of her life that she'd never read with me. I felt a pang of sadness, a sense of loss for the RS we'd wasted, the secrets she'd kept. But I also felt a sense of gratitude. She'd left me this land, this legacy. She'd given me a way out. And Tom was helping me honor that gift. The weeks turned into months. October bled into November. The days grew shorter, the nights colder. The leaves turned brilliant shades of red and gold, then fell, leaving the trees skeletal against the gray sky. The first frost came, coating the ground with a layer of white, the creek freezing at the edges. I harvested the last of the vegetables from the Garden, small, misshapen potatoes, a few squash, a handful of beans. It wasn't much, but it supplemented the venison and the canned goods. I spent my days chopping wood, tending the fire, and reading. I spent my evenings by the stove, the cast iron radiating heat, the cabin filled with the smell of burning wood, and the faint scent of the kerosene lantern. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. I had the forest, the creek, the fire, and the memory of S.A. Raw. And I had Tom, a distant neighbor, but a lifeline nonetheless. One evening, as I sat by the stove, the Foxfire book open on my lap, I heard a sound, a faint, rhythmic thumping, like a helicopter in the distance. It grew louder, closer, until it was directly overhead. I went outside, looking up at the sky. A news helicopter, its searchlight cutting through the darkness, circling the array. It was looking for something. Or someone. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I knew what this was. It was David. Or Jessica.
Oh, baza.
They'd reported me missing. The police were looking for me. The media was involved. I was a story. A wealthy man's father. Vanished without a trace. Possibly kidnapped. Possibly dead. I watched the helicopter circle for a few minutes, then it moved on, heading back Tawa RD Pierre Sons. I went back inside, my heart pounding, my hands trembling. I sat down by the stove, STA, ring into the flames. I was exposed. My solitude was compromised. My anonymity was gone. I thought about what to do. Should I hide? Should I run? Should I go back? I rejected all those options. I wouldn't hide. I wouldn't run. And I certainly wouldn't go back. That I was EARL. I was here. And I was staying. That I picked up the Foxfire book, turning to the section on camouflage. I read about how to hide a fire, how to disguise a trail, how to blend into the forest. I would learn these skills. I would become invisible. I would protect my solitude. I would protect my freedom. That I looked at the locket on the table, S.A. Ross picture smiling up at me. I thought about her letter. Just EARL. I was just EARL. And I would survive. No matter what came. That the helicopter didn't return that night. But I knew it was a warning. The world I'd left behind hadn't forgotten me. And it was coming for me. But I was ready. I had the land. I had the skills. I had the will. And I had S.A. Raw. That I would not be found. I would not be taken. I would not be broken. I was just EARL. And I was home. Chapter 7 ends. Chapter 8. The smell of burning leaves and high-octane fuel. The helicopter sightings became more frequent. Twice a week, sometimes more, the thumping of the rotors would echo through the valley, the searchlight sweeping the tree lines, the infrared sensors probing the darkness. I adapted. I learned to read the wind, to predict their flight paths based on the weather and the time of day. I learned to mask my presence, burying my fire during the day, covering the roof with pine branches to break up the outline, staying inside the cabin when they were close, my movements minimal, my breathing controlled. Tom Abernathy came by less often. He didn't say it, but I knew he was our of the helicopter. He was a man who valued his privacy, and my unwanted attention was a threat to his. He brought me supplies when he could, flour, salt, ammunition for the .22 rifle he'd lent me, a new axe head. He never stayed long. His visits were terse, his warnings blunt. They're getting closer. EARL. Saw a deputy CAR on the ridge yesterday. They're not giving up. I appreciated his honesty, even if it was grim. I knew he was risking his own anonymity by helping me. I didn't blame him for keeping his distance. I was a liability, a complication.
A danger.
I spent my days in a state of heightened awareness. I set up tripwires around the perimeter of the clear ring, thin fishing line attached to empty tin cans, a primitive RM system. I checked them every morning, resetting them, ensuring they were taut, invisible against the leaf litter. I read my routines, changing the times I went to the spring, the path I took to the GA Reden, the place where I chopped wood. I became a creature of the forest, moving with the stealth and caution of the animals I read the land with. I read every page of the Foxfire book, absorbing the knowledge like a sponge. I learned to identify edible plants, ramps, fiddleheads, morels. I learned to trap small game, rabbits, squirrels, grouse. I built SNA residential and deadfalls, checking them daily, the success rate modest, but enough to supplement my diet. I Leah rened to tan hides, using the brains of the squirrels to soften the skins, creating rough leather for moccasins and mittens. The winter came early and harrowed. The first heavy snow fell in late November, blanketing the land in a foot of white, silencing the forest, transforming the world into a pristine, frozen wasteland. The temperature plummeted, dropping to 10 below zero at night. The creek froze solid. The spring slowed to a trickle. I had to melt snow for water, a laborious process that consumed precious fuel and time. I spent most of my days inside the cabin, huddled by the wood stove, feeding it constantly to keep the temperature above freezing. The cast iron radiated heat, but it was uneven, the FAR corners of the cabin remaining frigid. I slept in all my clothes, wrapped in every blanket I owned, my breath visible in the air. The loneliness was a physical presence, a cold companion that read my meager wa RMTH'd. I saw no one for weeks. Not Tom. Not the helicopter. Just the forest, the snow, and the silence. I talked to myself sometimes, my voice sounding alien in the confined space. I recited poetry Ra had loved, sang songs from my youth, told stories to the empty room. It was a way to RD off the madness, to keep my mind RP, to remind myself that I was still human. Christmas came and went. I didn't celebrate. I didn't acknowledge the date. I simply survived. I ate a meager meal of beans and venison, read a few pages of the Foxfire book, and went to bed early. The wind howling outside, rattling the shutters, threatening to tear the roof off. New Year's Eve was worse. The silence was oppressive, the darkness absolute. I thought about David, about what he was doing. He'd be at a party, surrounded by friends, champagne, and laughter. He'd be celebrating his success, his wealth, his new life. He wouldn't be thinking about me. Not for a second. I felt a surge of anger, hot and bitter, but it quickly faded, replaced by a cold, numb resignation. I had no right to be angry. I had chosen this. I had walked away. I had forsaken him. And he had forsaken me. I thought about Sarah, about her letter, about her wish. I had fulfilled it. I had saved myself. I was just living in the woods, surviving the winter, alone, but at what cost? I was a hermit, a recluse, a ghost. I had no future, no past, no connections. I was a man who had ceased to exist. I pushed the thoughts away, focusing on the fire, the heat, the immediate needs of survival. I added another log to the stove, watching the flames consume it, the wood popping and crackling. I thought about the helicopter, about the deputies, about the world that was hunting me, that I knew they wouldn't stop. They'd keep looking. They'd keep searching.
Until they found me.
Or until I died. I couldn't let them find me. I couldn't let them take me back. Back to the humiliation, the shame, the poverty of spirit. I would rather die here in my cabin, in my woods, on my terms. I made a decision. I would not be taken alive. I checked the rifle, ensuring it was loaded, the safety off. I kept it within reach, by my side, day and night. It was my insurance, my guarantee of freedom. The winter dragged on. January was the worst. The snow piled higher, the cold deeper. I rationed my food, my fuel, my energy. I moved slowly, conserving calories, avoiding unnecessary exertion. I spent hours just ring at the fire, my mind numb, my body aching. February brought a brief thaw, a few days of rain that turned the snow to slush, the world to mud. It was a reprieve, a chance to gather more wood, to check the traps, to air out the cabin. But it was short-lived. The cold returned with a vengeance, the slush freezing into a sheet of ice, making movement treacherous. In March, the snow began to melt in Ernest. The creek ROA read back to life, swollen with runoff. The days grew longer. The sun war mere. The first hints of green ape red, skunk cabbage in the wetlands, buds on the maple trees. The forest was waking up. And so was I. I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I had survived the winter. I had proven myself. I was capable. I was resilient. I was just EARL. But I was a survivor that I began to plan for the spring. I would expand the GA Reden, plant more vegetables, experiment with herbs. I would repair the roof properly, using the last of the shingles. I would build a proper door, with a heavy latch and a peephole. I would reinforce the cabin, making it more secure, more defensible. I would prepare for the next winter. And the next. And the next. I was in this for the long haul. I was home. And I was staying. Tom Abernathy returned in EARLY April, his truck struggling up the muddy track. He looked older, more tired. He brought seeds, tools, and news. They're still looking EARL, but they're scaling back. The media's lost interest. The police recalling it a Volney, de Sape rants. But your son, he's still paying. Private investigators. Bounty hunters. He wants you found. Bad. I nodded. I wasn't surprised. David wouldn't give up. Not until he had answers. Or closure. Or controlled. I'm not going back, Tom. I said, didn't think you would, he said. But you need to be CA-reful. These bounty hunters, they're not like the deputies. They're ruthless. They don't CA-re about the law. They just CA-re about the money. He handed me a newspaper clipping. It was from the Millwood Gazette. The headline read, Missing Millionaire's Father. Is he alive or dead? Below it was a picture of David, looking haggard, holding a press conference. He was pleading for information, offering a road. His eyes were hollow, his face drawn. He looked like a man haunted. I looked at the picture, at my son, at the man he'd become. I felt a pang of pity, quickly extinguished by a cold resolve. He'd made his choice. He'd chosen his wife, his wealth, his image. He'd rejected me, and now he wanted to drag me back into his world. I wouldn't let him. I'll be CA-reful, Tom. I said. He nodded, looking at the cabin, at the improvements I'd made. You've done good, EARL, real good. But this place, it's not a fortress. It's a target. You need to be ready. He left then, driving away, the mud splattering his truck. I watched him go, then I turned back to the cabin. I looked at the newspaper clipping, then I tore it into small pieces, tossing them into the fire. I watched them burn, the words curling and blackening, the image of David de Sape ring into ash. I picked up the rifle. I checked the action, the magazine, the sight. I was ready. I had been ready since the day I'd arrived. I was just EARL. And I would defend my home. To the death. Chapter 8 ends. Chapter 9. The smell of gun oil and wet dog. The thaw was complete by mid-April. The forest floor was a morass of mud and decaying leaves, the air thick with the smell of damp EARTH and new growth. The creek was a torrent, the water brown and ROA ring, CA ryeing branches and debris downstream. I spent my days rebuilding the GA Reden, turning the sodden soil, planting the seeds Tom had brought, corn, beans, squash, cucumbers. I worked in the rain, my clothes soaked, my hands numb, driven by the need to prepare for the summer, to ensure a harvest that would sustain me through the next winter. I saw no sign of the helicopter, but I knew the bounty hunters were close. Tom's warning had been clear. I heightened my security. I set more tripwires, using fishing line and small bells, creating a perimeter a la RM system that would allure me to any approach. I camouflaged the cabin further, weaving pine branches into the walls, covering the roof with a layer of mud and leaves, blending it into the landscape. I dug a foxhole behind the cabin, lining it with logs, covering it with a RP and branches, creating a hideaway where I could observe the Clea ring without being seen. I practiced with a rifle, shooting at targets I'd set up in the meadow, tin cans, pieces of wood, the faded picture of David from the newspaper. I fired from different positions, prone, kneeling, standing, Leah running the trajectory of the bullet, the kick of the rifle, the way the wind affected the shot. I became proficient, my aim steady, my movements smooth. The rifle was an extension of my ARM, a tool of survival, a guarantor of my freedom. I saw Tom only once more that spring. He came at dusk, his truck rely making it through the mud. He was agitated, his face pale. They're here, EARL. 2 of them. In a black SUV. PA Ruked at the gate to my property. They asked about you. Showed me a picture. Offered me money. I told them to get lost. But they'll be back. And they won't be asking nicely next time. I felt a cold rage ignite in my chest. They were on my land. They were threatening my neighbor. They were violating my sanctuary. I would not tolerate it. Thank you, Tom, I said. For the warning. For everything. He looked at me, his eyes sad.
I'm sorry, Yarele.
I wish it hadn't come to this.
But you're on your own now.
I can't help you anymore. It's too risky.
For me.
For my wife. I nodded. I understood. He'd done more than enough. He'd given me a chance. He'd taught me how to survive. Now it was up to me. He left, driving away slowly, the mud clinging to his tires. I watched him go, then I turned back to the cabin. I gathered my supplies, the rifle, the ammunition, the knife, the water, the food. I climbed into the foxhole, settling in for a long night. I was ready. They came just before dawn. I heard the sound of an engine, a powerful V8, idling roughly as it navigated the mud. I peered through a slit in the branches, my eye to the rifle scope. I saw the black SUV, a late-model Navigator, its lights off, its silhouette bulky and menacing. It stopped at the edge of the clear ring, 50 yards away. Two men got out. They were dressed in tactical HAR, black fatigues, body armor, night vision goggles pushed up on their helmets. They moved with a practiced ease, their weapons, MP5 submachine guns, held at the ready. They were professionals. Mercenaries. Hired guns. David had spa red no expense. They split up, one circling to the left, the other to the right, converging on the cabin. They moved silently, their boots making little sound in the mud. They were good. Very good. But I was better. I'd had months to learn this land, to memorize every tree, every rock, every shadow. I knew their approach before they did. I waited until they were within 20 yards. The one on the left was closer to me, his back to my position. The one on the right was approaching the cabin door, his weapon trained on the entrance. I took a deep breath, steadying my aim. I squeezed the trigger. The shot was a shot RP crack in the silence of the dawn. The man on the left dropped, his leg buckling, a cry of pain escaping his lips. The man on the right spun around, his weapon sweeping Tawa, RD my position. I fired again. The bullet hit the ground at his feet, spraying mud into his face. He stumbled back, firing blindly, the submachine gun chattering. The bullets ring through the branches above me. I stayed low, my movements smooth, my breathing controlled. I ejected the spent CA ridge, chambering a new round. I fired again, aiming for the SUV. The bullet shattered the driver's side window, the sound of breaking glass loud in the morning air. The man on the right dove for cover behind the vehicle, returning fire, the windshield exploding in a shower of glass. The man on the left was crawling Tawa RD the cabin, dragging his injured leg, his weapon disc right. I aimed at him, but I didn't fire. I wanted him to suffer. I wanted him to feel the pain, the fear, the helplessness. The firefight lasted only a few minutes. Then silence returned, broken only by the moans of the wounded man and the ticking of the hot metal on the SUV. I stayed in the foxhole, unmoving, my rifle trained on the clear ring. I waited for reinforcements, for more men, for the helicopter. None came. After an hour, I crawled out of the foxhole. I moved slowly, cautiously, my rifle at the ready. I approached the wounded man. He was lying on his side, his face contorted in pain, his leg bleeding profusely. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with fear. Please, he gasped. Don't kill me. I looked at him. He was young, maybe 30, his face clean-shaven, his hair cropped short. He was a mercenary, a hired killer, but he was also a man, a human being just like me. I felt a flicker of pity, quickly extinguished by the memory of David's words, of Jessica's dismissal, of BA Ra's sneer. Who sent you? I asked, my voice cold. Your son, he whispered. David Miller. He wants you back.
Alive.
He's offering $1 million RS. $1 million RS. The price of my freedom. The price of my soul. Tell him I'm not for sale. I said. I turned away, walking to the SUV. The other man was slumped behind the wheel, a bullet hole in his forehead, his eyes ring blankly at the roof. I urged the vehicle, finding a satellite phone, a GPS unit, and a map with the location of the cabin marquette. I took the phone and the GPS, smashing them on a rock. I took the map, tearing it into pieces, scattering them in the mud. I walked back to the wounded man. He was still alive, his breathing shallow. I knelt down, looking at his leg. The bullet had shattered the bone. He needed a doctor. He needed help. But I wouldn't give it to him. Not after what he'd done. Not after what he represented. Tell David this, I said. Tell him I'm dead. Tell him he killed me the day he told me I was too poor to mingle. Tell him he'll never find me. Tell him he'll never own me. Tell him he's not my son anymore. I stood up, walking away, leaving him there, bleeding in the mud. I walked back to the cabin, gathering my supplies, my rifle, my freedom. I looked at the destruction, the broken glass, the bullet holes, the blood. It was a mess, a violation, but it was also a victory. I had defended my home. I had repelled the invaders. I had proven my worth. I spent the rest of the day cleaning up, burying the dead man, dragging the wounded man to the edge of the property, leaving him with a bottle of water and a prayer. I repaired the damage to the cabin, patching the bullet holes, replacing the shattered glass. I reinforced the foxhole, camouflaging it further, making it a permanent part of my defenses that I didn't see Tom again. I didn't expect to. He'd made his choice. He'd distanced himself. I understood. I respected it, that I spent the night in the foxhole, my rifle by my side, my senses alert. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I was too wired, too angry, too alive. The next morning, I buried the dead man properly, marking the grave with a simple wooden cross. I didn't know his name. I didn't want to know. He was just a mercenary, a pawn in David's game. But he was a human being. And he deserved a grave. That I stood at the grave, looking at the cross, at the forest, at the land that was my home. I thought about the battle, about the violence, about the cost of freedom. It was high. Higher than I'd imagined. But it was worth it. That I was just EARL. And I had fought for my life. And I had won. But the war wasn't over. David wouldn't stop. He'd send more men. More hunters. More killers. That I would be ready. I would always be ready. I walked back to the cabin. I sat by the stove, the rifle across my knees, the Foxfire book open on my lap. I read about guerrilla warfare, about ambushes, about defending a homestead. I would learn these skills. I would become a warrior. I would become a legend. I was just EARL. But I was also a survivor, a fighter, a force to be reckoned with. And I would never be found. Chapter 9 ends. Chapter 10. The smell of pine and the weight of silence. The spring turned into summer. The forest exploded with life, ferns unfurling, wildflowers blooming, insects humming. The garden thrived, the corn stalks tall, the bean vines climbing, the squash leaves spreading. I harvested the first crops, radishes, lettuce, peas, eating them raw, the flavors intense, the freshness stark contrast to the canned goods. I smoked more venison, dried more apples, preserved more food for the winter. I was a man obsessed with preparation, with survival, with the future. I saw no more bounty hunters. No more helicopters. No more signs of pursuit. The battle in April had been a deterrent. Word had gotten out. The mercenaries had learned that I wasn't an easy target, that I was willing to fight, that I was capable of killing. The price on my head had become too high, the risk too great. That I didn't relax my road. I maintained the tripwires, the foxhole, the rifle drills. I read my routines, changed my paths, camouflaged my presence. I became a phantom, a ghost in my own land. I was always watching, always listening, always ready. I saw Tom once more in late July. He came on foot, his truck apparently broken down. He looked older, more frail. He brought me a jar of honey, wildflowers from his wife's garden. He sat with me by the fire, the silence between us comfortable, familiar. They're gone, EARL, he said. The hunters, the police, the media, all gone. Your son, he's given up. Moved on. May right again. A new wife. A new life. He's erased you, EARL. Just like you erased him. I nodded. I wasn't surprised. It was what I'd expected. What I'd wanted. David had chosen his path. I had chosen mine. We were two separate entities, two parallel lines that would never intersect. I'm sorry, Tom, I said, for the trouble I caused you. He waved a hand, dismissing it. No trouble, EARL. Just life. Just the way things are out here. We look out for our own, even if they're ghosts. He stayed for an hour talking about the weather, the crops, the health of his wife. Then he left, walking back down the mountain, his steps slow, his back bent. I watched him go, a sense of finality settling over me. I would never see him again. He was the last link to the world I'd left behind. With him gone, I was truly alone. And I was truly freed. The summer passed. The days grew shorter, the nights sealer. The leaves began to turn, the forest blazing with color. I harvested the rest of the garden, storing the vegetables in the root cellar, smoking the last of the venison, drying the last of the apples. I chopped enough wood to last the winter, stacking it high against the side of the cabin, the pile a monument to my labor, my foresight, my survival. I spent my evenings by the stove, the rifle by my side, the foxfire book long since read and reread. I thought about Sarah, about her letter, about her wish. I had fulfilled it. I had saved myself. I was just EARL. And I was content. I thought about David, about the man he'd become, about the father he'd rejected. I felt no anger, no bitterness, no regret. Only a cold, distant pity. He was a man trapped in a gilded cage, a slave to his wealth, his image, his wife. He would never know the freedom I knew. He would never know the peace I felt. He would never be just EARL. I thought about the wedding, about Jessica's words, about the humiliation. It seemed like a lifetime ago. A different existence. A different man. Remembered that man. He was a ghost, a shadow, a relic of a past that no longer existed. I was EARL. And I was home. The first frost came in EARLY October. The leaves fell. The forest turned gray. The creek slowed. I read for the winter, checking the roof, sealing the chinking, stocking the woodpile. I was ready. I had done this before. I knew what to expect. I knew how to survive. I spent the winter in solitude, the silence broken only by the wind, the snow, the occasional howl of a coyote. I read, I thought, I remembered. I talked to Sarah, to the fire, to the empty room. I was not lonely. I was not bored. I was at peace. Spring came again, and summer, and fall. The cycle continued. I aged. My hair turned whiter, my beard longer, my body more stooped. But my mind remained sharp, my resolve unbroken, my spirit free. Years passed. 5, 10, 15. I lost track. Time became irrelevant. The seasons were my calendar, the sun and moon my clock. I was a part of the land, the forest, the creek. I was a tree, a rock, a shadow. I was just EARL. And I was eternal. One spring morning, I woke up and knew it was my last. My body was failing, my breath shallow, my heart weak. I was ready. I had lived a full life, a hard life, but a free life. I had no regrets. I got out of bed, dressing slowly, my movements stiff and painful. I walked outside, into the clear ring, the sun on my face, the air smelling of pine and damp air. I walked to the creek, kneeling down, drinking the cold, clear water. I walked to the garden, touching the soil, the plants, the life I had nurtured. I walked to the cabin, running my hand along the weathered logs, the stone chimney, the home I had built. I walked to the foxhole, looking at the rifle, the symbol of my defense, my freedom, my fight. I picked it up, holding it one last time, feeling the weight, the cold metal, the memories. I placed it back in the hole, covering it with branches, hiding it forever. It had served its purpose. It was no longer needed. I walked back to the cabin, sitting on the stump by the fire pit. I took the locket from my pocket, opening it, looking at S.A. Ross' picture, at David's young face. I smiled. A genuine, peaceful smile. I had kept my promise. I had saved myself. I had honored her memory. I had become just EARL. I closed the locket, placing it on the stump beside me. I closed my eyes, leaning back against the cabin wall, feeling the sun on my face, the wind in my hair, the EARTH beneath me. I listened to the creek, the birds, the whisper of the pines. I smelled the pine, the EARTH, the smoke. I tasted the air, the life, the eternity. I thought about S.A. Ross' letter. Just EARL, that I was just EARL. And I was complete, that I took one last breath. And let go, that the forest was silent. The creek rushed on. The sun shone down. The cycle continued, and EARL was free.